May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be aligned with your love, O God, our strength, our courage, our freedom, and our wholeness. Amen. The Bible has three versions of Jesus' temptation story. That story on which we base our season of Lent. Lent is the liturgical season of 40 days of prayer, fasting, and special study based on the 40 days of Jesus' prayer, fasting, and testing in the wilderness. Of the three versions of the story written by Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the one appointed for this year is Mark's version. While Luke and Matthew's versions are around 230, 250 words in English translation, Mark's is only 30, depending on the translation. Mark, which is the shortest gospel we have, always leaves a lot to the imagination. And that is certainly the case with Jesus' temptation. And I love room for the imagination. Here goes. Now, in Mark's version of the story, Jesus is not reported to have fasted. Mark has no dialogue between Jesus and Satan spelled out. It's up to us to imagine what the temptation's content was. The only bottom line required scaffolding that Mark gives us upon which we can hang our imaginations is made up of 6 items. The whole temptation or testing process had God's Spirit as the driving energy. The Spirit drove Jesus into his testing. It does take place in the wilderness. It does last for 40 days. Satan actually does the testing. And then these last 2 items form, in my way of thinking, a both and of the temptation. Number 5, Jesus is surrounded by wild beasts, which he could see, and Jesus is supported or waited upon by angels which Jesus could not see. Now, I'm not going to spend a long time on each of these items, but I do need to say that when it gets to the wilderness, I interpret wilderness times to be those times in life when we have absolutely no maps. And the wilderness is where Moses and Jesus and you and I have burning bush experiences. The 40 days tenure of the test repeats a very deep biblical theme. That is, throughout the Bible, 40 is the symbolic number for going through a transformational, maturational experience that etches someone down deep to their soul. You're not mature until you've been through some 40-day or 40-year or 40-something experiences. In fact, in the early church, they would not allow priests to hear confessions until they had turned at least 40 years old. Throughout the Bible, 40 is the symbolic number for going through maturation or experiencing transformational maturation. You'll remember that it rained for 40 days and nights on Noah's Ark, and 40 is the number of years the formerly enslaved Hebrew nation wandered in the wilderness with their leader Moses to find liberation and freedom. So whether the journey from enslavement to emancipation is on the cultural and institutional levels, as in the 400-year journey America is still on to move from slavery to true freedom, or whether the journey to emancipation is a personal journey of emancipation, of getting free from something that has you personally enslaved, like an addiction, or a habit, or a character flaw that self-sabotages you. You and I have wilderness times of moving from disorientation to reorientation until the emancipation journey matures and becomes genuine in our character and in our body and mind and in our relationships. The collective dimension can be about, for instance, racism, of the lessons We must learn about COVID in order to attain herd immunity. That's not coming as fast as we want it to, and many people are resisting, as well as many people are inhibited from getting vaccines. Or it can be on the personal dimension about the need to exercise or pray or no longer hold grudges, or to make sure you de-escalate situations rather than escalate them. That is what Lenten disciplines are about. So whatever your Lenten discipline is this Lent, please let it be about your emancipation from everything that has you living small and false to yourself, less than your true self. Let your Lenten discipline address the integration of your work and your purpose so that you can bring them into alignment. Get those two together during Lent, or try to. Get to a point where all the different parts of you show up so that you are not showing up in life in a partial or false way. That is the liberative journey of the 40 days of Lent. Now to the both and dimension in Mark's temptation story. I've named Jesus as having wild beasts around him he could see as a both and with, at the same time, Jesus experiencing being waited on by angels he could not see. That both and has really gripped my attention and my heart this Lent. It seems such a perfect way to describe life and its complexities, and particularly life with God. A whole lot of life is contending with wild beasts, which we can see, and which tempt us to be disoriented. It is definitely the wild beasts of this pandemic and of violence and poverty and systemic racism that are so damaging and disorienting to us in these days we're living in. Every crisis we encounter, from COVID-19 to the failure of the Texas power grid last week, it all seems to be an X-ray that reveals an underlying systemic inequity that punishes people of color in disproportionate ways. And yet, or nevertheless, while the temptation story tells us those wild beasts and even Satan, according to Luke's version, will not be going away entirely. As we all know, much of life is learning about dealing with wild beasts. Jesus was aware of the wild beasts and, both and. Like us, we are all being invited to rely upon the support and service of the reality of angels. Angels we cannot see. So let me tell you what I mean about relying on angels you cannot see. This idea has me gripped because of an experience I'm going to tell you about I had last week. I had watched a great documentary about how much Dame Judi Dench, the internationally acclaimed Shakespearean actor, James Bond movie star, and also Oscar winner for her 8-minute portrayal as Elizabeth I in the movie Shakespeare in Love. That actor. This documentary was about how much she adores trees. She's my sister. This documentary that I had seen was about what some tree scientists had taught her about her own treasured trees that are in her 6-acre garden in County Surrey. And one passage in the documentary showed springtime caterpillar and aphid invasions into and onto her trees. Now stay with me. You can go ahead and start making a connection between the invasion of the caterpillars and the aphids with the wild beasts that Jesus could see in his temptation. These scientists showed Judi Dench that her trees sensed when they were under attack. And I'm sure you want to know that when leaves drop their photosynthetic rate, you know they're under attack. Any leaf that is under attack from a caterpillar sends messages to other leaves that they are under attack. And some trees fight back. For instance, beech trees, when they sense that deer are grazing on their leaves, they send out more tannin to make the tree leaves more bitter so that the deer stop grazing. Dame Judi Dench's trees, which were being overwhelmed by the caterpillar and the aphid attack, also called in reinforcements. The pine trees, which were attacked by the aphids, sent out a cloud of strong perfume, and the invisible perfume summoned ladybugs to come and eat the aphids. Amazing. The next morning when I was praying, when I got down to that stillness point, that perfume cloud of Judi Dench's pine trees showed up in my morning prayer. I perceived in my contemplative eye that I was actually connected to the miracle of that perfume cloud and to the elements of that perfume cloud. That perfume cloud and I were unified. We were one. We were part of one another. That epiphany of unity of me and all of creation didn't take place in my mind's eye. It didn't take place in my own eyes. It took place with what I have come to call my contemplative eye, my contemplative vision, which is available for every human being. It is important to note that the first book I taught in this room, once I arrived 2 years ago to be your interim rector, was Richard Rohr's newest book at that time called The Universal Christ. And about 100 of us would come here on Wednesday nights and study, or Thursday night, and study it that 2019 Eastertide. And in that book, Rohr lays out his theology of what the first chapter of John's Gospel is all about and proclaiming. And that is that everything that has been made through the Logos or the Word or the Christ or big love or however you translate the Greek word Logos. And consequently, everything that has ever been made has within itself what John's Gospel calls the light. And that all of us are connected to one another. All of us are connected to one another. All creatures are connected one to another. The living with the dead, connected to one another. By all of us having within us the light. That is the universal Christ. And that's what the prayer book tries to say during baptismal services. Will you seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself? I think we could add, will you seek and serve Christ in your neighbors and in creation, loving all parts of creation as yourself? So back to my prayer period. In that prayer period after the Judi Dench documentary, I became aware of my unity with her trees, emitting that SOS perfume which summoned the ladybugs to come and defend the trees from the aphids. Then after my prayer period was over that morning, I read the daily Lenten meditation of Pope Francis, who wrote that morning that when our experience of our true home or our life soul headquarters is in the universal Christ, that whatever our eyes and our mind's eye cannot see, rather than nothing being there, there actually is God's love that is there waiting and serving us invisibly. Just because you don't see something there doesn't mean that there's nothing there. There actually is God's love, God's angels waiting and serving us invisibly. My spiritual father, Thomas Merton, called this the hidden wholeness, or the hidden ground of love, in a beautiful lyrical piece called Hagia Sophia, Holy Wisdom. He writes about the hidden wholeness that the spiritual eye can discern beneath the broken surface of things. Whether it's a broken political system, a broken relationship, or a broken heart, there is, he says, in all visible things, a meek namelessness, a hidden wholeness. This mysterious unity and integrity is wisdom, the mother of all. Richard Rohr says Parker Palmer has said these words to have served as a source of hope for him. Once one has eyes to see it, wholeness can always be discovered, hidden beneath the broken surface of things. My friends, it is wholeness that we need today. Thomas Merton's letters have been collected, and the first volume of the collected letters are about all these relationships that he had in his correspondence. And he claimed that they were all linked to one another, even though all of these people didn't know one another. He corresponded with Abraham Heschel, with Martin Luther King Jr., with Dorothy Day, with all sorts of people who were Muslim and other religions. But he said that though they didn't know one another, they were actually in a network of relationships grounded in God that made them one. Merton discovered God as the ground of his own being, and in that same ground, he found the rest of reality, especially his brothers and sisters, in a unity that was beyond all separateness. This is central to Merton's thought. And he wrote some college students that the happiness of being one with everything in that hidden ground of love, for which there can be no explanation, that happiness is everything. I believe that smallness, separateness, and superiority are the wild beasts of our lives. We must reduce their number, and we can do that by relying on the invisible angels. I got so angry and upset when I read that our brother Rick, former Governor Rick Perry, said in a blog that Texans would rather continue to deal with blackouts than have the federal government regulate their power grid. Texans want to be separate. And then I remembered this sermon to myself. I imagined that Jesus' temptations were about separateness, smallness, and superiority. And yet, the angels kept whispering to Jesus, "You must remember that the most important word said at your baptism was that you are beloved. And that is the case with everyone. We all are united in a hidden ground of belovedness." including our brother Rick Perry. Trust that. Trust that belovedness is your central identity this Lent, my friends. It is the hidden wholeness of you, unified to everything. Pray for your enemies. You and they are one. Pray for people you passionately disagree with. You and they are one. Be the hidden wholeness and unity experience of it. Be hidden wholeness and unity. Experience it, and thereby let the world through you know that it is united, and thus be liberated and emancipated this Lent. Amen.